Hey guys, so it has been an eventful day for not only the Steem community, but really the entire blockchain space with everything that's been happening with the Steem blockchain today. So I wanted to make this video as just kind of a Basics 101. Here's the nuts and bolts of what has been going on, because my DMs have literally been full all day with people asking questions, everyone just talking, trying to figure out what's going on. But beyond that, I've also noticed in a lot of the conversations I've been seeing on Twitter about this, that there seems to be some misconceptions or maybe misunderstandings about what exactly delegated proof of stake is and what it isn't. So we're going to dig into all of that and talk about not only what happened, but why this is actually a really big deal for the entire blockchain community. So just to lay a little bit of groundwork for this conversation, I'm going to give you a really high-level overview of what delegated proof of stake is and how it is decentralized, which will be important for you to understand as we're going through the story of everything that's been happening with Steem and Tron. So a DpoS, or delegated proof of stake blockchain, basically has consensus witnesses. And so on the Steem blockchain, we've got a top 20 witnesses that basically control the chain. There are other witnesses, but they basically hold all of the power to do anything. And if you want to make any changes on the blockchain, you have to have at least a majority of them voting in favor of that. And so the way that it's decentralized is that those 20 spots are voted on by the community. So they're not appointed by some central entity, but they're actually voted on by the people that are using the blockchain and owning the stake. And so let's get into that a little bit. Why is it delegated proof of stake? So let's say that, I just said that it's voted on by the community. Let's say that you have 5 Steem and I have 5,000 Steem. Well, my vote is going to carry more weight than someone with 5 Steem. And that's going to be really important to keep in mind as we're going through this. So one of the misconceptions I've been seeing around this whole thing is people are not sure what was the difference between Justin Sun acquiring Steemit Inc. and what happened today. So let's back the tape up to about 2 weeks ago and talk about that. So Justin Sun acquired Steemit Inc., which is a company, but is not the entire Steem blockchain. So Steemit.com is one interface for Steem, but there are multiple user interfaces that access information from the Steem blockchain that you can use, such as busy.org and SteamPeak and eSteem. All of these are operating completely separate from Steemit Inc. And so if Steemit Inc. went under, they could still operate on the blockchain. And then you have all of these dApps that are built on top of the Steem blockchain. Things that you may have heard of are like Splinterlands or 3Speak or DTube or Apix. And so again, if Steemit Inc. went under, they could still operate on the Steem blockchain. So where things get really interesting and honestly kind of messy is that when Justin bought Steemit Inc., which again is pretty much just Steemit.com, and then the whole Steemit Inc. team, which is doing a lot of the maintenance and work for the blockchain, he also acquired Steemit Inc.'s stake. So remember how we talked about how in a delegated proof of stake system, whoever's got the most stake gets the most vote. And so the amount of Steem that Justin Sun inherited would have been enough for him to basically knock out the top 20 witnesses and put in his own top 20, which would then essentially centralize the blockchain, because instead of having 20 people that were voted on by the community that are all running their own nodes, you would have one person that is controlling it all. Now you might be wondering, why is this suddenly a problem? If Steemit is 4 years old, are we suddenly worried about Steemit Inc.'s stake? Well, what's interesting is this large pot of Steem is what we call ninja mined Steem, meaning that it was mined from the blockchain early on before it was even really publicly available. And so other delegated proof of stake blockchains have certain rules and parameters around that kind of stake, but Steemit never did. And the reason that the community had never really done anything about it before is because Ned, the previous CEO of Steemit, just kind of promised that he wouldn't do anything malicious with it to change the chain. It wasn't in writing. It wasn't legally binding anything. It's just Steemit community trusted him that he wouldn't. And so when Justin Sun suddenly had control of the Steem, they were like, wait a second, we don't actually have any official agreement. It was just kind of a friendly agreement. And now we don't know if we trust Justin. And so that is what led to the soft fork. Now, people are on both sides of whether they think that was a good idea or a bad idea. But basically what the soft fork did is that it put limitations on that Ninja Mind stake so that it couldn't be used to make major changes on the blockchain. And so if you want to dig into that deeper, there are literally tons and tons and tons of articles on both sides on steemit.com that you can read. But basically the witnesses that voted for it, and they did have a consensus, they were able to get enough witnesses in the top 20 to vote yes for that and push it through. Their thought process was, hey, let's protect the blockchain from becoming centralized. Let's put this, kind of security measure in place, where people on the other side, generally speaking, were like, yeah, but he bought that. So doesn't he have a right to his property? Does it feel okay to basically change the properties of something that he paid for? So again, that's just a high level. You can dig way deeper. There's way more points on both sides. I'm not going to get into that. But a soft fork happened and there was a limitation put on his stake. So it's not that he suddenly didn't have the Steem anymore, but it basically froze it. So there wasn't like a whole lot that he could do with it. So now fast forward about a week later and we have what happened today. Basically what Justin Sun did is he went to 3 exchanges, Binance, Huobi, and Polynex, and basically convinced them to take all of the Steem that was sitting on their exchanges and use that to change out the witnesses and basically change the entire governance of the blockchain. So first, let's dig into a little bit more of the technical stuff on how they were able to do that. And then we're going to talk about why this matters. So basically the way things work in Steem is that you have Steem, which can be just traded and bought and sold quite easily and quickly. But then you have Steem Power, and that's actually how you vote for witnesses and do things on the blockchain. So you take your Steem and it's called powering up, and it kind of puts it into this almost frozen zone where if you wanted to access that Steem, you have to then power down, which takes 13 weeks. And so whether you think that is a good thing or not is beside the point, but basically in order to use your Steem really for anything on the blockchain in terms of voting for content that you like or voting for witnesses, you need to power up that Steem in order to make it usable. So basically what happened is, let's say that I had 300 Steem on Binance, which I didn't, but let's say I did. They took that Steem and literally powered it up for me. Now this did 2 things. First of all, it basically freezes my funds. So they took their users' money and made it so it's inaccessible to them for 13 weeks. So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is that they then used that Steem to literally change the governance of a blockchain. Now let me just repeat that. Without users' consent, these exchanges used other people's money, their users' money, to not only freeze their funds, but to change the governance of a blockchain. So what's really interesting about this is if you look at the blockchain space as a whole, there are many different modes of operation in terms of how people are trying to solve problems. And delegated proof of stake is just one way that has been attempted and tried as a way of decentralization. So I think in the grand scheme of blockchain experimentation and finding things out, we learned something very interesting today that I think most people didn't really foresee potentially happening. Like the risk for a chain becoming centralized in a DpoS system is always there because again, if someone has enough stake, they can control the top 20 witnesses. But someone using the leverage of exchanges and this crypto sitting on those exchanges to make that voting power is something that really, as far as I'm aware of, has never happened in blockchain history. So you've heard, don't keep your money on an exchange. And the reason why is that when you have your funds in a third party's hands, you really don't control them. And today was really just an example of that. Oftentimes when people say don't leave your money on an exchange, they're thinking in terms of like, hey, what happens if that exchange went out of business, or if some government regulation caused them to freeze funds, or if something happened. But here's another example of how your funds might be used in a way that you didn't approve of. So what's next for Steem and Steemit after all of this? I honestly don't know. It's kind of a cluster, and every time I refresh my Twitter feed, like every 5 minutes, there's some new breaking thing in the story. And so this video was not necessarily intended to talk about all the latest things that have been happening in the story, but to more offer a really good base of support on more of the technical side of what happened, where we came from, what the last few weeks have looked like, what actually happened today, for those that have been kind of confused and curious about the differences between when Justin acquired Steemit a few weeks ago versus what happened today. So I really hope that you found this helpful. If you have any other questions, please leave them below, and I will do my best to help if I can, and if not, maybe someone else in the community can help you out. All right, love you guys. Have a good night.